"Stay out of my way," the judge snapped, his voice cutting across the courtroom like something meant to wound, not just command. The fluorescent lights above Courtroom 4B in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia hummed faintly, the air too cold for comfort, the kind of cold that settled into joints and stayed there. At the back of the room, near the double doors, a woman in a pale grey uniform stood with a tray of untouched water glasses, her posture quiet, almost folded into the wall. Her name tag read, Miriam Carter. Most people never looked twice. There was a faint scar at the base of her left wrist, thin, clean, old. No one in the courtroom knew what it meant, except one man seated near the witness box, Deputy U.S. Marshal Daniel Hayes, who had gone completely still when the judge spoke. Not visibly, not enough for anyone else to notice. But something in his face shifted, just slightly, like a memory stepping into the light without permission. The judge continued speaking, unaware. The room moved with him, the way rooms often do when authority fills them. But something had already begun to change. A waitress who moved too quietly, a courtroom that was about to understand exactly what it had missed. If you've never heard a story like this before, stay with it. And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing. These are the kinds of stories that live in the quiet. Spaces between what people assume and what turns out to be true. Now let's get into it. 3 hours before that moment, the courthouse did not slow down for sunrise. At 7:12 in the morning, the cleaning crew was already rotating out, replaced by clerks, assistants, and the soft beginning of legal machinery coming to life. Miriam Carter moved through it all without drawing attention. She carried a tray in one hand and a folded cloth in the other, wiping surfaces that would be touched by people who never noticed who cleaned them. She had been on her feet for nearly 14 hours already, not because the shift demanded it, but because she had picked up 2 others without mentioning it to anyone. Her movements were deliberate, not slow exactly, but measured, the kind of motion that wasted nothing, the kind that younger staff sometimes mistook for indifference until they needed something done quickly and realized she was already halfway through doing it. A junior clerk dropped a stack of files near the registrar's desk, papers scattered. Miriam stepped in, crouched, gathered them in perfect order, and placed them back without a word. The clerk barely looked at her. She didn't mind, she had learned not to. By 9:30, Courtroom 4B was already filling. High-profile case, political implications, media interest, the kind of proceeding where everyone stood a little straighter, spoke a little louder, as if importance could be amplified by volume. Miriam moved between the aisles, placing water, adjusting chairs, clearing what needed clearing. Her knee ached, a dull, persistent pressure that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with something older than that. She shifted her weight without breaking rhythm. The body kept a careful record and presented the bill only after. A young assistant whispered to another, glancing at her. "She's always like that," one said.
"Barely talks."
"Probably just tired," the other replied. Not tired exactly, but something close to it. She had spent years learning how to conserve energy in ways that had nothing to do with sleep. 4 years earlier, in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, Miriam Carter had been known by a name. No one in that courtroom would have recognized Ironveil. It was not a nickname given lightly. Not because it sounded impressive, but because it described something precise. The kind of presence that could move through chaos without being seen until it was already too late. The kind of control that held under pressure the way steel holds, under strain, bending just enough to survive, never enough to break. The mission had lasted 11 days. Extraction window missed, communication compromised, terrain hostile. She had led a small unit through a collapsing perimeter while maintaining radio silence, guiding them by terrain memory alone. 3 men injured, 1 unable to walk. She carried him for nearly 9 kilometers without stopping, not because she was stronger, but because she understood what stopping would cost. That was when they started calling her that. Ironveil, not for what she did in combat, but for how she held everything together when everything else fell apart. She never corrected them, She also never used the name again, because she had learned something after that mission, not because it changed her, but because it showed her how other people changed around her when they knew, and she didn't want that. Judge Robert Whittaker had spent 19 years on the bench. He believed in structure, in order, in the idea that systems existed to protect people from chaos. And for most of his career, that belief had served him well. He was not a cruel man, not by intention. But over time, something in that belief had hardened. Not X exactly, but something close to it. A kind of certainty that left very little room for interruption. He disliked inefficiency. He disliked deviation, and more than anything, he disliked being challenged in his own courtroom. He had a habit, small, almost invisible. When someone he considered unimportant spoke out of turn, he didn't look at them immediately. He finished whatever he was doing first. Then he looked, slowly, deliberately, the kind of look that reduced people without raising his voice. It had worked for years. The first sign came at 10:18. A witness, a middle-aged man under visible stress, began to falter during testimony. His breathing shifted, subtle at first, then sharper. The court stenographer didn't notice. The prosecutor didn't notice. But Miriam did. She stepped forward quietly, placing a glass of water within reach, adjusting the man's chair by a fraction. Her hand paused briefly at the backrest, counting. Not seconds exactly, but something close. She leaned in just enough. "You need to sit back," she said softly. He did, instinctively. His breathing steadied. The moment passed. No one acknowledged it, except Deputy U.S. Marshal Daniel Hayes. He had been watching her since she entered the room. Not directly, but in the way someone watches something they don't yet understand. Something in her movement stayed with him. The confrontation came 20 minutes later, a delay. Minor, procedural, but enough to irritate the judge. Miriam stepped forward again, this time to adjust a microphone that had begun to feed back sharply. The sound cut through the room. Judge Robert Whittaker looked up. "Who allowed you to interrupt proceedings?" he demanded. Miriam straightened. "I was preventing interference with the recording, Your Honor." Her voice was level, not defensive, not apologetic. The judge's expression tightened. "You are staff, not counsel, not security, not court authority." A pause. "Stay out of my way." The room went still. Something in her voice when she replied shifted the air just slightly. "If the interference continues, the transcript will be compromised." Not defiant, just factual. The judge leaned forward. "Are you instructing this court?" "No, Your Honor." "Then act like you understand your position." The word he used next was quiet, precise, invisible, the kind of word that lands harder than shouting. Miriam did not react, not outwardly. She simply stepped back. But she did not disappear. She became very still, the kind of stillness that holds weight, the kind that does not ask for permission to exist. Something in the room noticed, something deeper than thought. At 10:47, the doors opened. A man in formal uniform entered, Deputy Marshal insignia. Authority carried not loudly but completely. Daniel Hayes had already risen. The man walked forward, his eyes scanning the room once. Then stopping on her, he did not speak immediately. He did not move for 3 full seconds. Then he did something no one expected. He saluted, not casually, not symbolically, fully. The courtroom froze. "Ironveil," he said quietly. The word settled into the space like something heavy enough to bend it. Everything changed. What followed was not dramatic, it was precise. The witness collapsed minutes later. Fully this time, cardiac distress, panic rippled. Miriam moved first. She dropped to one knee, assessing airway, pulse, responsiveness in a sequence so fast it looked like instinct. "Clear the space," she said, not loudly. But everyone moved. She directed the marshal. "Call emergency response. Tell them to bring advance support." She turned to the clerk. "Time of collapse?" 10:52, the clerk stammered. She nodded. "Good, keep track." Her hands moved with controlled urgency. Decision 1. She repositioned the man's airway using a technique not taught in civilian. Emergency response, subtle, efficient, preventing obstruction without excessive movement. Decision 2. She instructed controlled chest compressions before full arrest. Not because it was protocol, but because she saw where it was going. Decision 3. She stabilized him long enough for responders to arrive. The room followed her, not because they understood, but because something in her presence made hesitation feel incorrect. The judge stood to the side, watching. Then, quietly, he moved a chair out of the way. Small, necessary. He did not speak. He acted. Later, in a quiet corridor, the marshal found her. He held out a coin, worn, marked. "You never came back," he said. She looked at it, not reaching. "I stayed where I was needed." "You still are." A pause. Not disagreement exactly, but something close. "That was a long time ago," she said. He shook his head. "No, it wasn't." She didn't take the coin, but she didn't refuse it either. That afternoon, Judge Robert Whittaker sat alone in his chambers. His hands rested on the desk. Still, he replayed the moment. The word he had used, invisible. He understood something now. Not because someone told him, but because he had seen it. When he found her later, he did not make it formal. "I was wrong," he said. "Simple." She nodded. Not forgiveness, not rejection, just acknowledgement. The next morning, the courthouse moved exactly as it always did. Papers, voices, deadlines. Miriam Carter carried a tray through courtroom 4B. No one stopped her. Most didn't even look. She checked a chair, adjusted a glass, moved on. The world continued. It always does. She had never needed it to do anything else. There's something in Miriam Carter's story that stays with you long after it ends. Not the reveal, not the recognition, but the space between what people see and what they assume that means. We decide what someone is worth based on, what they're holding when we meet them, the tray, the badge, the uniform, and we rarely question that decision. But the truth moves differently. Not loudly, not obviously. The kind of truth that doesn't announce itself, the kind that waits. Integrity like that doesn't need an audience. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who would understand it. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribing takes about 2 seconds, and it means you won't miss what comes next. These stories exist because you keep showing up for them. Thank you.